here's what the appraisal looks like, a little glimpse of the actual first page of the appraiser's report. And the thing I want to point out to you here is this: at the top of the page, it says, as fancy and as much like a spreadsheet as it looks, it's still an opinion. It's an educated opinion. Hopefully somebody who's had lots of experience appraising similar properties, but it's still their opinion. What makes it an opinion instead of scientific fact? The fact that they have to make adjustments. Therefore, their opinion of what an adjustment needs to be is why it's an opinion. Because appraiser A might say, okay, we're in Providence Plantation in Charlotte, and this house, this subject property, does not have a fireplace. But another house around the corner sold in here last week. It did have a fireplace. Everything else about the two houses are exactly the same. That's impossible. I'm just giving you an example. But that one around the corner sold for $913,000. Therefore, since this one doesn't have a fireplace, how much is a fireplace worth? In my opinion, it's worth an adjustment of $7,000. So this subject should sell for $906,000. 7,000 less than 913 or whatever I just said, right? And that's basically what they're doing, except much more detailed, because it's never that easy. There are always more differences than just one little thing. But it's that appraiser might think it's $7,000 for a fireplace adjustment, and another appraiser might say it's $9,000 or $4,000. And they're not right or wrong. It's just their experience and their best educated guess. So, I mean, they can't go crazy, but within reason, they're going to have different numbers of these. And what kind of adjustments are we talking about? A fireplace, brick versus vinyl siding, brick versus synthetic stucco, since that has some problems, might have lower value in their eyes. Vinyl, hardy plank, wood siding, and then how many square feet, and then was the kitchen upgraded recently, or is it a 20-year-old kitchen that still looks like it was 20 years ago? That needs to have an adjustment made. Pool versus no pool. 2-story versus 1-story is interesting, because ideally we shouldn't even be comparing houses that are like that. If we have a 1-story subject, we should try to find 1-story comparables to compare it to. Commission doesn't like us to compare different styles or types of houses like that. Compare single story to single story, 2-story to 2-story. So here's this appraiser. They're giving an opinion of value, and it's called the market value. That's the estimate. It's not an art. It's not a science. Sorry. It's more of an art because it's based on their interpretation. And only licensed appraisers can do appraisals. And there is an expiration date. This is an interesting question in CE class even. Agents that have been around forever answer this in all kinds of ways. So you tell me in the chat, what is the expiration date for an appraisal? How long does it last for? How long is it good for? Let's think about it. What's happening? The comparables that we're trying to use, or the appraiser's trying to use, need to be what? Geographically close, structurally similar, like 1-story, 2-story, only compared to 2 stories. As close in amenities and condition as you can find. Make adjustments for the differences. And then what's the other thing? How recent it sold. So what if this appraisal was done and turned in today, completed today, turned in, and the comps they used were whatever they had available, the most recent comps up till today. But then tomorrow, one day too late, because the appraisal's already finished, a better comp that's almost the exact twin of this subject property, much better than the comps that we had to use from the actual appraisal that got turned in yesterday. a better comp comes up and closes. It was under contract that whole time, but it hadn't closed yet, so we couldn't use it. It closed. That appraisal is not as good as it would have been if we had one more day and we could have used this exact match or a much closer match. Therefore, the official kind of test question or test answer to that question of how long is an appraisal good for? Pretty much the day it's printed. It's only as accurate as the day it came off the printer. That's maybe a better way to ask the question. So to say what's the expiration date implies you can't use it anymore. That's not true. You can still use it. There's only one appraisal typically done for a transaction unless there's a dispute. So it's not like the appraisal needs to be done the second before the closing. It's done probably 3 to 4 weeks before closing, maybe 2. Takes longer to turn it around and order it and get it back. But how long is it good for? What's the expiration date? The day of when it's printed, basically. Because it could be kind of outdated and not as good any given moment. There are minimum standards of practice that they have to follow set by the Appraisal Standards Board. If you have a dispute or a question or a conflict with what you think they came in at, and it was maybe you're one of the agents involved and the price was $530,000, it appraised for $523,000. Well, now we have a problem because now the buyer doesn't want to pay $530,000 anymore because the appraiser says it's only worth $523,000. And the lender is not going to loan 90% on the $530,000. They're going to loan 90% on the $523,000. So that creates a potential problem. What if the seller refuses to lower the price from the $930,000 down to the $923,000? Let's look at it graphically. We've got I forgot my numbers. Let me do it this way. We've got a 550. Let's go with 550 as our sale price. The appraised value, the appraisal comes in at 543. And this particular buyer is borrowing, I just said 90 because I picked it. It could be any loan to value ratio. It's a 90% LTV. That lender is only going to loan them 90% of the lower of the two, whichever comes in lower. Hopefully the appraisal is going to come in right at sale price, and that happens most of the time if it's justifiable. But occasionally that appraiser can't find enough comparables that have sold for enough to justify appraising it at the same level as the sale price. Even though they know what the sale price is, they've got to justify it and prove it with those comps that have sold. So if the lender's going to only loan based on the lower, that means that borrower is only going to be able to borrow, in this case, $488,700. What if the seller insists on getting paid $550,000? They're short by about $7,000 than they were planning to have to put into this thing. If the seller won't budge and come down, they don't have to. They could say, hey, buyer, I'm not reducing my price. This is a seller's market. You can just take a hike. Because they also know that buyer has a nice big fat due diligence fee that they're losing. So it's more of a dare. It's like, hey, I dare you to walk away from that $10,000 due diligence fee. Or 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 20, 40, 80, 100, 100, 400. I've seen them all, right? I've heard of them all. It's going to be that kind of a showdown, like a joust again. So the question to that buyer is, do I have enough money to add to my down payment to get up to that sale price? Because I can only borrow this. The lender will only base my loan on the lower of the two. So I've got to, as a buyer, put in $7,000 more to my down payment because that seller will not come down off their price. What if it's a nice seller and they're like, you know what? I'm wealthy and I'm feeling charitable, so I'm not going to be super nice, but I will be nice enough that let's rewrite this thing for $546. And that way the buyer only has to add $3,000 more to their down payment, and we'll just rewrite the contract and I'll meet you in the middle. So that's the other possibility when it appraises lower than sale price. They could meet somewhere in the middle. Seller could agree to come down, buyer could agree to add more to their down payment, because the lender, what we do know is the lender is only going to loan on the lower of the two amounts. And then the other possibility is that we said the buyer adding all the money to get up to there, the seller coming down a little bit, or the seller could come all the way down. Or the seller could say, just go away. I'll keep your due diligence fee. If you don't want to buy it at this price because you can't get the financing for as much as you need and you don't have that difference of the money to add to your down payment, nice try. Good luck to you. I'll be keeping your $14,000 due diligence. Good luck to you. So that's how that appraisal stuff could shake out. You're right. What do they do when there's no extra funds? They take a break. And sadly, that could be, if we have a fall through and if it's an FHA buyer, well, they had due diligence money, but only so much. They had earnest money, but only so much. And maybe they don't have enough of this after they're losing it on this first try to go on to the second try. So they got to wait until they can build their funds back up to try again. All the more reason that we do things like use that little additional earnest money trick to kind of lessen the chances of them being so far behind and out a big chunk of money if things go wrong. It's scary and it's sad. And by the way, that's all sad for the buyer, but here you were helping them this whole time, and now you're out 27, 30, 40 hours. Now, you're going to maintain the relationship, and when they do finally save up the money, hopefully they don't blame you, and they will come back and you'll help them again later, but you're starting from scratch. So that is possible. So this CMA versus BPO, the CMA is usually free because it's considered part of your tasks you're doing when you get a listing. When you're doing a listing appointment for somebody and listing their house, they're going to want and expect you to tell them what it's worth, what it will probably sell for. That's just part of that process. You don't get to charge for that because it's for a client or a potential client. You have a fiduciary relationship. But the BPO is not done for a potential client or an actual client. It's done for a third party. If we use words we've had before, a BPO is done for a customer as a third party. A CMA is done for a client or hopeful client. That BPO is just hired gun, pay to play. What do you as an expert think this house is worth or should sell for? I keep saying it wrong. What sorts of third parties as customers might pay you to do a BPO? Who might pay you for that? Just a one-off. I don't want you to do anything. No, don't list it. Don't do anything except tell me how much it will sell for. That's the biggest one, banks. Banks like to tell or hire brokers to tell them how much something probably will sell for when they're considering foreclosing on it. A bank cannot. This is testable. A bank is not allowed, and you're not allowed to let them pay you if they're wanting you to do a BPO for the purpose of making a mortgage. That's a no-no. Hey, bank, don't be so cheap. Paying me to do a BPO might cost, by the way, agents might make about $100 to do a BPO. $100. An appraisal is probably at least $400 or $500. Appraisers make a lot more than we do for doing this, about the same thing. Now they're doing it better probably. So, no, what I said was banks can't pay a broker for a BPO if it's for the purpose of making a mortgage. They would have to get an appraisal done. They can't try to save money by only hiring a broker because it's a fourth or a fifth of the cost. So there's some things you can't do a BPO for. And one of them is making a mortgage or refinance, any sort of that sort of thing. It would be if the bank was trying to figure out, where do we stand? What's the value of this property? This borrower is 3 months behind on their mortgage. We're considering foreclosing. What are we working with here? Is it worth it? Or is it worth a lot less than the loan amount? And then someone else had a good one. For sale by owner might pay you just for your opinion of what it should sell for, because they still don't want to list. They just value your opinion and they say, hey, tell me how much I might get for this. And we already talked about this one. Provisional brokers are not allowed to do BPOs for money. Only non-provisionals can do that. And then here's those situations. If it's originating a mortgage, refinancing a mortgage, or the law forbids anything other than an appraisal, you can't do a BPO or be hired to do one. It'd be your job as a broker, a bank asking you to do one, and you say, what's it for? And they say, we're trying to get a mortgage for this person. You have to say, sorry, I can't do that, because you know it's not allowed. So you'd have to be the one to put your foot down. They would love for you to do it because they would save money. Here are the elements of value. We can remember them with the acronym DUST. Desirability affects value. No mystery there. What's something desirable about a property that might cause you to be willing to pay more for it? What sorts of things make you desire a property more? It's all about that location. There you go. Like lakefront. You expect property to be worth more on the lake because it's more desirable. And it's less of it. It's also limited, right? There's only so much lake frontage of a given lake. Also, desirability in terms of financial ability. That affects the value too. How you can use it. It's worth more to you if you can use it the way you want to. So part of that process in that due diligence period is, can I do with it what I wish? Are there covenants and restrictions that don't let me operate my home-based business from here? Because I have to. There's no other option. Otherwise, I'd have to spend $1,200 a month renting commercial space. I just want to do my home-based business here, so let's make sure before the offer goes in, actually, to look at the covenants and restrictions and see if there's any sort of obstacles or requirements. It might be that a neighborhood says, sure, you can operate your home-based business as long as no customers come and go. So it's a virtual kind of thing, and as long as it's not a nuisance. So pet boarding facility in the backyard, probably not going to be allowed if it's in the covenants and restrictions. But can you teach real estate classes on Zoom? Probably not going to be a problem because nobody's going to know you're doing it. You're not bothering them. You're just basically, it's like you're watching Netflix, except you're talking as far as the neighbors are concerned. So there's probably no restriction there, right? How a buyer can make good use of it affects what the buyer's willing to pay for it. Victor's remark earlier goes back to this one as well, limited supply. In Charlotte, there's some old neighborhoods called Myers Park and Dilworth. They are only so big. Everything else came up around them, so they can't get bigger. That's why the suburbs are the suburbs. They're out and away, and they can grow. People are willing to drive out further to get to them because that's where the builders can build. There's no limitations geographically. Therefore, the ones that do have geographic limitations and are accessible to all the hot spots are going to grow in value faster. I had a client one time, and she lived in more of a production house in the suburbs around, at the time, $150,000 or so price point. And as a side job, she cleaned houses in Myers Park. And at the time, those were $500,000 to $800,000. She was frustrated when we put her house on the market because I had to tell her, I think yours is going to sell for $150,000. She's like, well, mine is just as big and it's just as nice as those. And she wasn't wrong, because it was all about the location. And I explained, Myers Park is only as big as it's going to get. So to live in there, you got to pick from those 67 houses. I don't know how many there are, but there's a definitive number. Hers, the builder can just put phase 8, phase 9, phase 10, a lot more expansion ability, right? Expandability. And then how easy is it to sell it? Transferability, like, do you have clear title? Is it in good condition? Do a lot of people want it? If it's not in good condition, fewer people are going to want it. Still, people are going to want to, but they're going to be willing to pay less because of the worse condition. And how hard is it to get this thing sold because of some sort of a clearing up the title, other people coming in, some liens in place that can't go away? All that stuff factors in. Properties have some element of all of these things that affects their value. The forces that affect value are social, economic, political, and physical. Like social, like the lake property. You want to live there because you want to do lake things on that lake property, hang out on the dock, have a boat close by. Or the neighborhood amenities. You want to have access to that swim and tennis and nowadays pickleball and the gym and all that fun stuff. So you're willing to pay extra for that access. Economic forces are taxes, tax rates, zoning, is political. Did I skip physical? Sorry. Oh, no, there we go. So political would be a zoning one because there's a zoning board that can vote up and down for things. Physical would be proximity, closeness. You're close to the public transportation lines or close to the new interchange, the new outer loop. Before that came through, properties were worth this, but now that that's there, people can get somewhere faster. Therefore, the property values probably go up. And that brings us to the principles of value, economic principles of value. Here's the most important one that's the most testable for what an appraiser's looking at accomplishing. In the appraisal report, which is the opinion of that appraiser, what they are trying to figure out is what is the highest and best use of this property? Think about that. Remember that phrase, the highest and best use. So we have farmland here on the right, and that's probably been there a long time. On the left might have been farmland, but then a developer bought it and put houses on it. Is that farmland being used to its highest and best use? Or is it worth more if you carve it up and put more houses on it? Well, my favorite answer. It depends. What are we growing on that farmland? If it's in some states that allow a certain crop, maybe it is being put to its highest and best use if you're growing weed on it. But for the most part, you could probably make more, as I try to find my way past the underwear guy. There we go. Carving it up. But that's the question the appraisal report is trying to answer. One of the questions that they will address on their appraisal is, it is being put to its highest and best use, or no, I don't think it is. If they did an appraisal of my house right now, they would say it is not being used at its highest and best use because I'm living in this house as a residence while it's zoned industrial, and it's worth a lot more to be used as an industrial way. Some sort of industrial way, like a mini storage facility or plumbing supply house or Amazon warehouse, something like that, than it is me just sitting here living in it. And that's okay. But the highest and best use economically. Doesn't mean you have to. It just means acknowledging what that highest and best use is. Here's the other testable thing about this. It can change over time. A property's highest and best use may not be the same thing next year or 5 years from now. This highest and best use 30 years ago was what we're doing with it. But it grew out of it because zoning changed and we got absorbed by the city limits. Here's another example. This one I think might be in Toronto, but it's if we zoomed out, if we could zoom out, we'd see a lot of office towers, big office buildings. And there's this little old pink house jammed right there in the middle that all those buildings came up around. So is that little house and the lot it's on being used to its highest and best use? What would it maybe be worth more if it were used as? If we knocked down the house and built something in its place, What else? What better use could it be made? Starbucks. Not wrong. Another office building. That was my original guess when I first saw it. Let's see if somebody thinks of something I thought was, there it is. Jara did. How about a parking deck? That probably would be the highest and best use, depending on how much parking is available. At how much does it cost to get into the decks? I mean, I went down to see the Knight Stadium Christmas light display over the weekend, and I think it was $15, but it took forever to get into that deck. But that's the principle of highest and best use, and there are more principles. There's this one, the principle of substitution. This is the idea that if two houses are exactly alike, the one that is selling for less will get sold first, be more attractive. Because everything else the same, the prices are only difference, they're going to buy the cheaper one first. You do that in the store all the time. This shoe looks a lot like that shoe, but they're asking $5 less. I don't see enough difference to warrant me paying more of a price. Several items with similar utilities and amenities are available. The one with the lower price gets the most demand. And this is the cornerstone of that sales comparison approach that we're talking about, that we do as brokers, typically with a single family or a residential properties. This principle of supply and demand we're experiencing all the time, but it's very visible now because it's so lopsided still. Very much this exact diagram. We have a lot of buyers picking from a lot less inventory. So those buyers don't have a lot of choices, and so they're willing to outbid each other, and it makes the values go up. When the opposite is happening, and you've got a lot of houses and not a lot of buyers, the sellers now have to get a lot more humble and say, oh, if you pick me, I'll give you, I'll pay your first year HOA membership. Or I've seen a lot of things. I'll give you a car. I'll give you a year's supply of tacos. I've seen whatever they can do. When it's a lopsided buyer's market, sellers will bend over backwards. They have to, because they have to be competitive. They're not having to do it now. They also pay us bonuses in those types of environments too. Looking forward to those days again. This principle of conformity affects real estate big time. Anybody seen a house like on the left, a geodesic dome? If you walk inside that house, it's like all the rooms around the perimeter are triangles. You can't just put any kind of old furniture in those rooms. It's got to kind of be built to suit almost. They're typically more energy efficient. That's the selling point. But in real estate, your value is more secure if they are more similar. So neighborhoods with houses like the ones on the right, probably going to be more justifiable to pay X dollars for it. How do we price this basketball house on the left? Because there's no neighborhood full of them, at least in North Carolina, maybe out in the desert somewhere. Therefore, you'd have to find that perfect buyer, and even the buyer who loves it is going to take advantage of the market and say, well, gosh, this house doesn't look like all the box houses, therefore I don't want to pay full price for a 3,000 square foot spherical house compared to a regular house. I'm going to pay a lower price. And it's probably going to be that you have to take a cut or take a hit. I listed one of these one time and didn't sell. So that principle of conformity, maximum value is realized when the property conforms to existing standards. So you have to be careful also about overbuilding. Principle of conformity doesn't have to be a weird shape. It could be that this house on the bottom, that owner just spent $90,000 just completely blowing it out on the inside, making it just perfect and everything automated and bidet and top of the line, fancy cut edge marble counters and blah, blah, blah. And so they've overbuilt. And the houses tend to sell for $680 in there, but those guys want $880 because they put too much in the house. If you can catch a potential client when they're thinking about doing this, or a past client and they want to make it their own, you might want to give them that little warning. hey, you guys do what you want to live there, but just keep in mind if you do too much, you're going to be overbuilt. And I won't be able to get you the top dollar, or at least compared to, you won't get back as much as you put in it. The best thing to do in terms of where to buy financially in a neighborhood is to be in like that middle to upper middle range of values. So if houses go for between 4 and 7, being anywhere up to maybe 6 is safe. But if you get up toward that 7 and it still needs work or updates and you end up spending another 25 or 30 and now you bought it for 7 plus you put 30 in it, probably not. You have to stay there a while to appreciate into that amount of money you have invested in it. It is a good time for a break. Let's see. Wow. A little direct message in the chat. Somebody said they knew of someone who bought a house that had everything in it fully furnished, all the furniture, cars included, boat included. That appraiser would want us, or the lender, if the buyer was buying with a loan, hopefully they didn't try to write in all that furniture and cars and boats into the contract, because the lender would cut that short real quick. They'd say, are you wanting me to finance a house, or are you wanting me to finance cars and boats with a house wrapped around it? And so they would probably require, let's get all that personal property handled with a bill of sale. And then the appraiser, same thing. The appraiser is going to appraise it regardless of all those extras. They're going to appraise it just for the house itself as if it were empty. Because that's what they have most of to compare to, is houses that were empty. Yeah, good point. Okay, speaking of, let's go ahead and do our break. I'll see you back here in 10. Welcome back. Let's finish out our time tonight. Okay. All good? Still hear me? So this principle of conformity is huge in real estate. I've seen plenty of cases where houses looked a lot different from their surroundings. Another one in a little different way than this slide is when the house, maybe it's in a neighborhood with no HOA or no covenants and restrictions. And so the neighbor is misbehaving. You're trying to sell your house and the neighbor across the street from you has a project car jacked up in the front yard, has all kinds of mess in the driveway, and their garage door is open most of the time, and it's like a living room, completely messy. And that's great, fine for them when you're living there, but when you're trying to sell your house for top dollar and your buyers are driving up and seeing what their view is going to be out the front door, that's when it's going to affect your value, right? So that principle of conformity that's why HOAs exist. There's a lot of people with a lot of strong opinions about HOAs, and I don't like them any more than anyone else when it comes to too much oversight. But if they're done properly, it's to keep people from doing stuff to harm the property values of the neighbors, of each other. When they're abused, it's because somebody has some sort of ego-driven power trip, and they're just writing you a letter because your trash can was out 3 minutes past the allowable time frame. Other examples of the principle of conformity might be this. Maybe there's always a ton of cars in the neighbor's driveway. And who cares? You like the neighbor, they're nice to you, and they give you a cup of sugar when you need one. But when you need to sell your house there on the left, and it might be scaring buyers away that there's always going to be a car lot next door, that's when you care. That's when this conformity thing matters, because they're not conforming to a lack. And that's why the rules exist sometimes. The HOA rules might say no cars in the driveway at all. They have to be parked in the garage overnight, or no street parking. You ever driven through neighborhoods and you have to just dodge because there's always a million cars along the streets? And then some of the streets are too narrow because the builder tried to save money by building narrower streets, and there's really not room to street park, and it can get pretty complicated. Here's another example. No control. Somebody got a little creative. This is my favorite one. I actually like this one. But still, what's going to happen when the neighbors are trying to sell, or you're trying to sell? You don't conform to those around you, it could affect the value. And then there's this. Now, we probably have some neighbors disputing each other, right? Look, Bob, I painted my fence. You kept harping on me to paint my fence. Well, I painted it. How you like that? And that's probably what Bob's thinking. So this principle of conformity can really, really affect the value. Another one is anticipation. If you look in the background behind that sign, you can tell it's your classic downtown area that has older condition, right? The property, you can see that on the left side, that right above my head, there's damage to the siding. It's old stuff, but eventually it's going to have new stuff. This makes me think of gentrification when they build or when they buy outdated, older neighborhoods and put new Starbucks and things in there. Well, this principle of what's to come could affect the value of the older stuff. The folks who've owned these things for years might benefit here if they're willing to sell, because the project is coming to have this nice brand new Lakeview community or whatever they're calling it. And so because of what's going to be, they get more value. Might also be because of roads going through. Another principle is contribution. Some amenities you put in, like a pool, don't contribute any, if not maybe at least very little value. A pool is not worth what you spent to put it in, right? It doesn't add value to your property on the level of how much it cost you to put it in, typically. So if you've got two houses that are both worth $300,000 and one of the owners puts in a pool, and that pool costs $20,000, that one is not now worth $320,000. It's not worth $300,000 plus the $20,000. And if you want to list that house the year after they put the pool in, you're going to have that discussion with the seller. Hey, seller, I love your pool. I think you did a great job. But my job is to give you an interpretation of what the market has been willing to pay for properties with pools. And I'm not seeing any more than like 310, 305. Well, gosh, it's not even worth selling. Okay, good for you to know that now, rather than me lying to you just to get your listing. And 6 months from now, you think I did something wrong. I'd rather tell you the truth now than let you down later. So you have a chance to at least give them the fair scoop of what's to be expected. This principle of competition says that profits attract competition. When you make money, other competitors are going to come. And then too much competition affects value. People have a lot of choices. I like to also say that McDonald's is never lonely. How many times do you see a McDonald's all by itself? Maybe when it's a brand new area, but within the year, there's going to be another selection, another choice, another fast food option or gas station. There's rarely a single gas station at a street corner. So competition. In real estate, how much competition is there among sellers right now? Not a lot, right? There's not a lot of other houses that they have to compete against. How much competition among buyers? A whole bunch. So buyers have to bring their best, bring their A game. How many similar properties are on the market? Could look like this. And then the principle of change. That's Charlotte, actually. They're on the... doggy's messed up my green screen. That's Charlotte from 100 years ago. They're on the left. That's me on the bicycle. And there's Charlotte on the right. It's a lot of change. No condition remains constant. The only thing constant is the fact that things are going to change. So whether you're in the business as a broker, that just means be adaptable. When this lawsuit stuff turns into something that affects the industry, be adaptable. We're just going to have to explain and disclose differently. So out of all of those principles, which ones on the list are the most important for an appraiser? As I fix my green screen. 1 second. Get all intrusive. Okay, I'm back. It worked. So which one? Which one out of this list is the most important one? You got it. Highest and best use. Is it being put to its highest and best use? So through that appraisal process, here's the process. The appraiser accumulates data, specific data about costs and sales and income and expenses, general data about the surroundings, the 4 factors affecting value, the different levels, nationally, regionally, city, neighborhood. The appraiser is going to ask, what am I doing? Right? What's the problem here I'm trying to solve? Trying to figure out what it's worth. And then they're going to do the work needed. They're going to collect the data, analyze that data, probably comparable sales if we're using the comparable sales method. Income, expenses, if it's an income producing property, there's a method for that, as we'll see in a minute. And then determine that highest and best use. Is it being used at its highest and best use? Is there competition? They'll estimate the land value if they need to for certain types of methods. They'll estimate the value of each of the three approaches. There's three approaches, and they will say it's worth $430 using the sales comparison method. It's worth $480 using the cost approach. We'll talk about it in a minute. And it's worth $460 using the income approach if it were an income producing property. So which is it? Oh, it's a single owner just going to live there, be a regular owner occupant. Then we need to use the sales comparison method and give that value that we came up with using it more weight than the value using the other methods. I'll show you that on a slide in a minute. The last step before reporting is reconciling those different methods for the final value. They don't average those three methods. They weight them. So I'll show you that in a second. And then they produce the report. Here's the methods. Oops. The sales comparison method for certain type of property, the cost approach for a different type of property, and the income approach. What are the different properties? The sales comparison method is for single family all the way up to 4 units and land. If it's a duplex, if it's a condo or townhouse or a single family, we're going to compare it to similar ones that have sold using this sales comparison method. That's what that is. If we need to figure the value of land, we're going to do that too. Sales comparison method. What land has sold? For how many acres have sold per acre? At what amount per acre in that area? The cost approach is for unique properties, special uses like old churches, schools, public buildings. There's no neighborhood of churches. Well, in the South, it feels like it. There's one on every corner, but none of them that sell for frequently enough for you to say, oh, here's 3 church comps. So infrequently and different, and it's a different type of building. And so cost approach involves figuring out how much would it cost to build this structure brand new. And now we need to adjust because it's not brand new. It's 30 years old. How much has it depreciated? So we would subtract a dollar amount from the cost to build it new to allow for that depreciation because it's not new anymore. And you kind of have to back into it that way. That's what the cost approach is about. And then what if it's an income property, an investment property, an apartment building commercially, or for residential, or maybe even a single family house that's a rental, or a duplex or a fourplex. Income producing properties are a whole different ballgame than when you're going to live there. You maybe don't care as much about what it looks like if it's an income producing property. You just care about, can I get the most possible rent from this? If any of you live in a town where a college is located, it's much more valuable that rental property is close to the university than it is looking cute. Cute is nice, but proximity is probably more important. That college kid on a budget just wants to make sure it's safe, reasonably updated, and close to what they need it to be close to. And so they're not as concerned that it has the latest and greatest flooring, countertops. Certainly not that it's 20 minutes away from the school. They want it to be close to the school. So it just needs to serve more of a utilitarian purpose. And so since it's an income producing property, you want to look at the numbers if you're considering buying it. If it's an appraiser doing an appraisal on this thing, they want to see what people are willing to pay for rent for properties like this, and how much it costs to run it, how much it costs to pay the utility bills and the operating expenses, and then see what the net operating income is. We're going to learn how to calculate net operating income and cash flow just a little bit. We're going to scratch the surface. You bet. I could see that. Somebody commented privately, lives near NC State. All the houses are old and really expensive. You bet. An appraiser is going to try, if at all possible, to use each of the methods. And then again, they're going to say, well, which kind of property is it? Oh, it's an old school? Then the figure, the number of value that I came up with using the cost approach needs to be the one that I lean toward the most, right? Or if it's an income producing property, I'm not going to pay as much attention to what the value was using the sales comparison approach or the cost approach as I am the value I got by using the income approach. What an appraiser is not allowed to do out of those three methods of estimating value, don't take an average of the three. They should not each get equal weight. They need to be weighted according to the type of property it is, because certain types of estimation of value is better for certain types of property. So no averages, no medians or means. It should be weighted, and that's it, depending on which type of property. When it's the sales comparison method and they need to pick comparable solds, things that have sold recently, how do they pick them? Tell me in the chat. What are you going to look for if you need to figure out what your house is worth? What features in a house that you have a whole list of houses in the MLS to search for? All the ones that have sold in the last couple of months, what are you going to put in so that you can look at the solds? Square feet the same, perfect, very important. And if it's different, you need to have some idea of how much to allow for it per square feet to make up that adjustment difference. Bedrooms, bathrooms, amenities, is it in a swim and tennis community or not, or an HOA community or not? HOA communities probably have more value, just seems to be the case. Similar lot size, land size, you got it. Open floor plan versus not, or modern versus old. The older ones like the 90s and even into the 2000s a little bit, but that's when they started opening up those floor plans. We went from really closed off to really opened up. 90s and 80s and older, each room was a room with a little door space in between. 2000s and beyond, people got a little crazy. So much so that if you had a partner or a spouse situation and you each had your group of friends, it was almost hard to have a party if both groups were trying to talk over each other. We realized there's still value in not having just a complete warehouse open area. We need to maybe have a couple of different meeting spaces within the same roof. And so we brought it back into line a little bit. Custom, that's good. Custom versus production, that's important. Great ideas. Here they are. Age is important. Location, really important. Design, size, physical, and then recent. And then also, was it a distress sale? If the one that sold last week was a foreclosure and the subject property you're trying to figure out the value of is a regular sale, no foreclosure, no pressure, no distress situation, the seller's like, I'll sell it. I don't have any problem. Nobody's breathing down my neck. It's not okay to use a bank foreclosure comparable because there was an extreme case there. That seller took a price that they probably wouldn't have taken if they weren't in that situation. So you can't compare distressed sales with non-distressed sales. And then usually 3 to 4 comps are enough. That's what the lender's looking for. Occasionally the lender will say to the appraiser, hey, could we get one more comp? You put 3 in the report. It's still kind of unclear if we're good and solid on this value for this price. So therefore, we'd like to at least see 1 or 2 more comparable sales if you can dig them up. But 3 to 4 usually do it. Best comps. Where do you think we find? What database do we use to find the best possible comps? What's a good resource for that? The MLS by far is the most detailed, thorough resource. The tax records are a resource if you can't find anything in the MLS, but the problem with the tax records is frequently incorrect data and not as much data, not as much detail as what someone's going to put in a listing in the MLS. If nothing is sold within a recent time and distance, that's when it gets tricky. And these last 5 years where people flooded into the business and they just basically threw a price at the wall and see if it would stick because they knew they were going to have multiple offers, they got lucky. Congratulations, you were in it when it was easy. But now that it's kind of normalizing and you have to actually have some expertise of figuring out what something might sell for, you're going to have to learn like the rest of us did and get good at this stuff. And it's not easy anymore. We're getting back to where we have to actually figure out what something might sell for and not just experiment by trying something. If we just try it too high, it just sits. It's back to that again. So sometimes the property is so unique. I sold one in North Wilkesboro that was a 5-year-old log cabin home on 27 acres with a hand-built 2-story log hunting cabin back up in the woods, totally off-grid, with its own little septic tank and outhouse, and a bunch of barns and buildings and pastures, and there's no neighborhood full of those. I had to do some acrobatics, and I had to cut and paste. So I had to, first of all, see the primary, most important criteria to answer your question is recency. How recent has it sold? Because what is something sold for last year, pretty irrelevant compared to what they are worth this year. I sold a house she was a second-time buyer. I helped her every time. I helped her with her first townhouse. 2-3 years later, we sold that for her and got her into a single family. And when she did that, her dad, who had not come with us on any showings or anything, it was just at the start of this crazy market we're just coming back out of. And the price was $195, and we had to compete with 3 others, and we had to pay $196. And Dad had her upset and crying after she was under contract, saying, "Your comps that I'm pulling are showing that you're overpaying by a lot." And she called me crying and worried, and I'm like, "Okay, no big deal. Let's figure it out." And I'm like, "What comps did he show you? I'll send them over." The comps that Dad had looked up were from Zillow, and that's okay, but they were from a year ago. And one of them was from 2 years ago. And right there, I could stop. And I said, well, first of all, irrelevant. No appraiser would ever use these comps. What these comps say have nothing to do with what the market is now. And then secondly, how far away from the subject property, and they were all over the city. They weren't even locally geographically local. So that was easy. I got her talked off the ledge. And then it really hit home and helped even Dad feel better. 2 weeks later, while we were still under contract, when a house down the street that looked exactly the same sold for $205. Now Dad was my fan. Dad wasn't too sure about me 2 weeks earlier, but then he liked me again. And that's it, right? It's so how recent is really important. And then geographics is really important. If you've got to go outside the locality, it's more important to find how recent it sold than it is to stay super close. But sometimes you just have to pick and maybe go with something that's a little like, I would even go, for your purposes in this class, don't listen to this, but in real life, I would even compare a single story to a 2-story if it was in the same neighborhood and sold in the last month, at least the same square footage-ish, to see what is somebody, especially now with few choices, buyers have to get a little more flexible. So I could see a buyer who would prefer a 1-story settling for a 2-story just to get it done, long as it had the size and amenities and stuff. So you would have to just Frankenstein it and say, okay, what did something that sold recently sell for? Then let's compare and then make an adjustment, because a 2-story is probably not worth as much as a 1-story. Because a 1-story has a bigger footprint, it requires a bigger roof, because a 2-story that's 2,000 square feet is stacked, right? And so it has a 1,000 square foot roof. A single level that's 2,000 square feet has to have a roof that spreads out, and it can only be built on certain sizes of acres because it's got a bigger footprint. So that's, a couple things that we know in general factor in there. So MLS, tax records, best comps are the most recent and the closest. Then we get into type. Then we get into size. and similar amenities and upgrades, appliances, flooring types, counter types, siding. What's this guy? Anybody know who this is? Who is this? You sports fans know who this is. This is the Heisman Trophy, and he is known for the stiff arm, right? The stiff arm meaning sticking that out there to push the tacklers away. And I have him here because an arm's length transaction is important. In other words, you want a transaction, you want to pick comparables that have sold that did not have a family element, for instance. A comparable that sold down the street just yesterday, but it was parents selling to their kid, it's probably not going to be an accurate representation of what that house is worth, because there's a chance that parent might have given the kid a super good deal compared to a stranger. So arm's length transaction, no conflict of interest. I had one and the appraisal came in $11,000 low, and the comp that was used, it was a bigger house, single story instead of 2-story, and this appraiser used it. And it looked okay on paper, except it was a suspiciously low price for the square feet, and it was a bigger house. And I went ahead and called the seller of that sale. Had nothing to do with that sale, not the seller, but the agent. Called the listing agent, and I said, "Hey, what's up? This house seemed to be worth more than what you got for it. What happened there?" And she said, "Oh, well, that one was an estate sale. The owners passed away, and their kids just wanted to cash out. Right there, that affects the value. And the kids sold it to their best friend. Do you think maybe they gave them a deal on a house that they never really had an emotional attachment to? It was just something they inherited. So yeah, no wonder a bigger house sold for so much less and messed up my sale, my appraisal of my sale." And that appraiser didn't even bother to make that phone call like I did. He wasn't even suspicious. He just was putting in the time and cranking it out. And I tried to appeal it, and me and the other agent tried to appeal it together. And all he said was, "No, I stand by my appraisal." And that particular lender, that situation didn't have any other avenue of recourse available. Some people ask, could you get a second appraisal? It all depends on if the lender will allow it and care. And that lender said, first step is see if the appraiser will add in a comp or make an adjustment, and they wouldn't. So that was the end of that. Sometimes they might let you, but then who's going to pay for that second opinion appraisal? So, at the end of the day, if you feel pretty confident the other appraisal is going to come in and save the deal, maybe you're willing to pay it. But it's going to be another $400, $500, $600. Got to be careful about conflict of interest, though. So arm's length transaction needs to be, again, if you're comparing it to a bank owned or a short sale subject property, then yes, use distressed sales as comps. But you need to factor in an adjustment depending on the fact that it was distressed versus not. When we're making adjustments, dealing with this comparable or comparable sales model, that subject property is going to either be better than or worse than the the comparable. The subject is either going to be better than the comp. And so that's when we have to make adjustments. The appraiser makes adjustments. So if it's a subject property that has brick siding, but the comp that sold yesterday down the street has vinyl siding, but the comp sold for $200,000, is the subject, everything else the same, is the subject worth more or less than the comparable property? Subject has brick, comparable has vinyl. The subject is worth more than the comparable, isn't it? But we need to see what that comparable sold for. We need to add dollars to what they got to allow for that brick versus vinyl adjustment. Let's look at it maybe as a drawing. We've got the subject. What's that subject worth, by the way? How much should it sell for? The comparable got $200,000 last week when they closed with their vinyl siding. What's that subject worth We don't know. That's what we're trying to figure out. My point is the adjustment is made to the comparable. You never adjust the subject because you don't know what the subject is worth. That's what you're trying to figure out. So that's a testable question. If they say brick compared to vinyl is worth $10,000 more, what are we going to do with that $10,000? Are we going to add it or subtract it to or from the sale price of that comparable? We need to make it as if the comparable had brick too, because the subject has brick. And therefore, we need to add that 10. And so everything else being the same, if the comparable had brick, like the subject does, it would have sold theoretically for 210 instead of 200. We have to adjust the comp, not the subject, because all we know is what the comp sold for. We do know that. Therefore, that's what we can adjust. So watch out for that. Be careful on the questions with that. And it's just a process of comparing the features of both and adding or subtracting from the comparable sale price in order to end up seeing what the subject should have sold for based on all those adjustments. So it's those words superior and inferior. Is the subject superior to the comparable or inferior to it? Always adjust the comp, never the subject, because you can't add or subtract from a question mark, and that subject is a big question mark. But you do know that those three comps sold for those amounts at the bottom, and therefore comparing the subject to each of those comps, add or subtract from these various sale prices will give you an idea, range of value of what that subject should sell for. What kind of comparables can we not use to come up with a probable sale price, or for an appraiser, an appraised value, market value? What can we not use out of the MLS? Status-wise, actives, under contract, expired, withdrawn, solds. You got it. Actives and under contracts are useless to us for determining what something should sell for, because we don't yet know what those sold for. For the actives, I call the list price a wish price, because they're just hoping they get it. We don't know if that's based on anything more than just, I want it, so I'm going to ask for it and see what happens. There's a lot of overpriced listings out there, guys. So don't count on the listing price. Yeah, you can ask whatever you want, and there will be an agent who's go along with it too. Not that they should, and at some certain point of too much fluff, they could get in trouble, especially if it doesn't end up selling and that person complains about them to the commission. It could end up being willful misrepresentation because they knew it wouldn't sell for $300, but they went ahead and listed it that, and they have proof in a market analysis they did that shows $250, but they went ahead and took the $300 listing anyway. And then under contracts, some people don't realize, people ask all the time, hey, it's under contract. What did you get for it? I can't tell you because we're not finished. What if it fell out of the what if it went back on the market active? Now you would know what the seller was willing to take, and it could potentially harm them. And also, remember that thing we learned back in chapters 9 and 10? Whose permission do you have to disclose the highest price, the highest offer? Not the sellers, but the one who made the highest offer. Well, the one who made the highest offer is probably the one that's under contract. And whose permission do you have to disclose what it's under contract for? Not theirs. They're not going to give it. Therefore, we can't disclose that. We don't even know. The only person that knows what it's under contract for are the parties involved in that transaction. So it's not listed in the MLS with that number. Therefore, we can't use it. I mean, in real life, the lender does want to see a couple of these just to get an idea of what the competition looks like, but the adjustments will not be made to these things. The adjustments can only be made to sold prices. So the object of this exercise, of this comparable sales method, is to make the comparable properties more like the subject. add or subtract dollars to make it more like the subject property. And so to ensure of the most accurate estimation of value, find some that don't need as much adjustment. Find as similar as you possibly can to begin with, because the more adjustments you make, the more chance for human error there gets into the mix. We are held accountable for doing CMAs in a competent manner, and we can be disciplined for doing it wrong. When it comes to the appraisal, just a definition you need to know is correlation. This correlation word, it just means the end, the equal sign. It's like once all those adjustments have been made, using those to determine that final probable sale price is correlation. You're summing it up, saying, yep, okay, therefore, think of correlation as the word therefore. Looking at all these facts and figures and adjustments, therefore, it's probably going to sell for this. So if you have this example, this type of a question that pops up, subject property has 2 bedrooms. The comparable property has 3 bedrooms. The estimated value of the 3rd bedroom is $2,500. According to the sales comparison method, the appraiser should do what with this information? How should they make an adjustment? They need to adjust by $2,500 between the 2 properties. What are they going to do? Add or subtract, and from which property? So here's how you can do it. And obviously this one is a little more direct, self-explanatory. But that subject has 2 bedrooms. Once they get into 3 or 4 or 5 differences, you're probably going to want to use the scratch paper. Subject has 2 bedrooms. Comparable has 3. A bedroom is $2,500 worth. So what do we need to do to the feature here of this comp to get it to the same as the subject? We need to decrease it. We need to subtract from what it sold for. So whatever that comp sold for, we're going to subtract that $2,500 from the comparable. And I think most of you got that. Yep, number 3 is deduct $2,500 from the value of the comparable. First step, you might have said, okay, anything that says deduct, I'm going to pay more attention to because I know it's deduct. But this one, A, is deduct from the subject, red flag. You never adjust the subject. It can't be that one. Subject property has a 2-car garage. A comparable down the street sold for $245 a month ago and is superior to the subject by having a 3-car garage. Everything else is the same. The broker's estimation of a 1-car garage value is $5,000. What's the probable sale price of the subject property? What are we going to do there? We need to do something with that $5,000. We're going to either add it or subtract it, aren't we? The next step is the comparable superior or inferior to the subject. Do we add it or subtract it from what the comparable sold for? So whether you're doing it with your hands or on a piece of paper, the subject has 2-car garage, the comparable has 3. Comparable sold for $245. We need to bring that comparable down to the level of the subject, lower it to make it as if it had 2-car garage, and therefore we need to subtract $5,000 from its sale price. And so the subject, based on everything else being the same, would be worth 240. How about this one? The subject property has 2.5 bathrooms. A house in the same neighborhood sold for $175 last week. It's inferior to the subject because it has 2 bathrooms, but everything else is the same. The broker figures that the full bath adjustment would be $3,000 and the half bath is worth $1,500. What is the probable sale price of that subject property? Now, in real life, and I should probably just change this exercise a little bit. In real life, it is not true that a full bath is worth twice a half bath. It's probably going to be a little bit different. It's going to be worth not as much as double. It's probably going to be like 3,000 compared to 2,000. But we'll just use these numbers. So what do we know? We know the subject has 2.5, has 2, and it has a half. One of each, right? 2.5 baths. The comparable only has 2. Doesn't have any half baths at all. That's hard to understand. We'll just say it that way. So then what? The comparable sold for $175 recently. And then a bath adjustment is $3,000 if it were a full bath difference, $1,500 if it's a half. What's the difference? Well, the twos match up, so the only difference is the half. And so the comparable needs 1 in order to be brought up to the level of the subject. So we need to add the value of a half bath, add that $1,500 to make it $176.5. There we go. Right? If they put more features in there for you to make adjustments, it's just going to be that. You just go down through the list and say, okay, we're going to add for the bath, subtract for the brick, we're going to add for the square feet, subtract for the acreage, whatever it may be. So there's a glimpse, an idea of that sales comparison method. There's not going to be a ton of them, but there might be a couple of these on there. And they could ask them in a couple of different ways. This obviously would be a calculation method, right? A calculation problem, one of those 8 calculation problems. But they could ask this and test you on this topic without you having to use a calculator. If they said more like this one, they've done the math for you. You just need to know how to do what to which, right? So yeah, you could see it in a couple of different places. That was the sales comparison method. And that's the one you as a residential broker are going to use most of the time because it fits the type of property you're dealing with. But if you end up on the commercial side and run into unique properties, then as a broker, you're going to have to use the cost approach. And as an appraiser, they're going to have to use the cost approach because there is no neighborhood full of those types of properties. You're going to have to cut and paste and pick and choose and Frankenstein it, right? So the cost approach is based on that principle of substitution. You're saying, what would it cost to build it new? And now let's back out from that price to account for the fact that it's not new. It's old. It's depreciated. So it's the maximum value set by the cost of acquiring something equally desirable and a valuable substitute property. It's 5 steps. Here's the thing about the cost approach, a testable thing. The first step is to estimate what the land alone is worth. If this old church is sitting on 5 acres, pretend the church is gone. How much is 5 acres worth in that town, in that area, in that immediate vicinity? you need to consider how much that land is worth and set that to the side. Land is worth $150,000, the land alone. If there were no church, we could sell the land by itself. Next, we're going to figure out how much would it cost to build this church new, build this building new. Any improvements that are here, if we had to build them from scratch today at today's prices, how much would it cost? Oh, it would cost $800,000. I'm just pulling numbers from air here. Next step would be, oh, wait a minute. It's not brand new. We need to figure out what this thing this old church is worth today. And it's worn down. It's got mold and mildew and old asbestos tile floors and holes in the wall, and it's showing its age. So that $800,000 that it would cost to build new needs to be decreased. How much has it depreciated? Maybe let's say $300,000 worth. So instead of $800,000, this church as it sits, just the building without the land included, would be worth hypothetically $500,000. See what I did? I depreciated the $800,000 to build new down by the depreciating amount. So it's really worth $500,000, but now we have to remember, oh yeah, it's also got that land though. It's not just a church floating in midair. It's a church on land that's worth, we've determined, $150,000. So that $500,000 plus the $150,000, our estimate is $650,000. The point here is, don't depreciate the land. That is highly testable. They love to test you on that. The land does not get depreciated. You only depreciate the cost to build the structure and the improvements. So you're going to use the cost approach for the improvements, but you're going to use the market, the comparable sales method for the land. And you add them back together there at the end, and there you have it. We need to talk about reproduction cost versus replacement cost, and then we'll look at an example from the book of how it all breaks down. And we'll do that next week. Before I let you go, we're going to work our way through the rest of this 17 in the yellow book. 17 is what it is. 1 second. Here we go. All right. So that is valuation. We will also get into property insurance. That will not take long. And between next week, we only have 3 more classes together before that test, guys. Right? So we're on track. And next week, we're probably going to pretty much finish the rest of our content. And then the Wednesday of the week after will be our review night. And then the test is the next night after that. So whatever you've been putting off, not doing, you get through the holidays, get right back on the horse and make it, just amp it up, speed it up, because there's a lot to cover still, and a lot of review. Whatever you've not been doing, just kick it into high gear because there's not much time. But we will get it all covered, and a lot of these are little small chapters. We'll go back to license law and commission rule and hit those highlights again. So let me know whatever concerns you have or questions you have along the way, and really plug in, and I'll be happy to help you. Look at those other resources. Pay for the YouTube premium, whatever it is, not the one with channels, but the one that lets you just run the video while turning off the screen and just have that thing running while you're driving down the road, while you're waiting in the bank line, whatever it is. Just get that in your ears. And if you haven't already been taking practice test questions, now's the time. If you've been considering paying for that, such a thing, or if you've already paid, be working it. Be working through those practice tests, and that'll be your best. The 15th. Well, the 15th, let me see. Yeah, I think I missed that one actually, but that topic, I've covered all the topics in the previous recordings. We'd have to just see what the topics were right after that, and then work backwards and go to the couple months ago. I'll see if I can figure that out and let you know. But I did miss one. Didn't hit the record button on one. But that's it. Yep. If you haven't already applied for the background search, thank you, Victor. Go ahead and do that. You should have probably done that in the last couple of weeks. But depends on how many places you've lived, how many names you've had as to how long it'll take that to come back. I wish for you a wonderful weekend, wonderful holiday. Hope it all goes perfectly and you don't have stress. And the January 10th is the makeup night. The January 4th is the official final exam. So the 4th is our exam night. And if you need to take another try, if you qualify for it, because you made a 60 or above, you need a 75 to pass. But if you make a 60 to 74, you get to try again the next week on the 10th. There you go. Take care, everybody.